Thanks for coming. So much nice to see you here. The Red Bank Planning Board will come to order this 12th day of February. Time is 7:03 p.m. Notice this meeting is being held in accordance with the public laws of 1975, Chapter 231. And adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by a notice sent to the Asbury Park Press and the Two River Times, posted in the main lobby of this building as well as the municipal website. Could we have roll call, please?
Mayor Portman,
Here.
Greg Fitzgerald, present. Thomas Welch,
Present.
Councilwoman Christina Bonatakis. Here. Pam Mancuso,
Here.
Lou Demento,
Here.
Barbara Boas. Here. Megan Massey, absent. Wilson Bibi,
Here.
Itzel Hernandez, absent. Fred Stone
Here.
and Brian Farnigan.
Professionals together.
Yeah, we could do this.
All right, we've got a couple of administrative things. We have the January 8th regular meeting minutes. Does anyone have any additions or changes? Or would someone like to make a motion to approve the January 8th regular meeting minutes?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second. All in favor?
Aye. Next up, we have resolutions of our professionals, our board attorney, engineer, and our conflict engineer. We'll group all of those three together. Does anyone have a motion to approve those three resolutions?
I can make that motion.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye. And then we have the resolution amending the master plan to include the environmental resources inventory that we talked about at the last meeting. I'll move that.
I'll second.
Second. By Tom. Mayor Portman.
He wasn't
Yeah,
here, so.
or abstain. Thomas Welch.
Yes.
Christina Bonatakis.
Yes.
Pam Mancuso,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
I wasn't here.
Barbara Boas.
Yes.
Wilson Bibi
Yes.
and Fred Stone.
Yes.
Okay, we have one public hearing tonight. It's the non-condemnation area in need of redevelopment study that our planner, BFJ Planning, has conducted. The governing body of the borough adopted a resolution authorizing us to undertake a preliminary investigation of these properties. Welcome back, Susan.
Thank you, I should say.
Just bring it real close.
Okay. Great, so you all may be wondering why we're here, or didn't we just do this about a year ago, 10 months ago? We were here to look at additional properties that the Borough Council has authorized you to determine if they should be added to the existing redevelopment designation area that this board recommended in April of last year. So I'm going to take you through its very short presentation. We have essentially done the same study that we did about a year ago, almost a year ago, on these additional properties. The idea would be that if this board determines that they are eligible for designation for redevelopment, the council would likely accept that designation, add them to the existing study area, and add them to the existing redevelopment area that would then be brought into the redevelopment plan, which is currently being drafted. So you're not here to look at any plan. It's really just to look at these additional 6 parcels.
And Susan, just to be clear, so that the public understands, this has no bearing on the study already adopted and any designations that have already taken place.
Right.
So that's not up for re-debate. It's not before the board this evening. The only thing that's up tonight are these properties and only these properties. Okay.
So just a quick way of background. Best control of the presentation. I think this board is very familiar with the planning around the train station area. There's a long history of recommendations from the borough planning documents, the master plan and others that looks at transit-oriented development and is really recommending the borough facilitate that transit-oriented development. In particular, the recent 2023 master plan specifically recommended using the redevelopment tool as a way to get at some transit-oriented development and working with New Jersey Transit and their designated developer on that process. So that process is a direct implementation of the master plan and was started about a year ago, as I mentioned. Just as a way of recap, the Borough Council directed you, the planning board, in December of last year, December 2023, to conduct the first preliminary investigation on a series of properties around the train station. You did that. We provided a study for that. You made that recommendation to the Borough Council governing body in April of 2024, that those parcels did meet that qualification or the criteria for redevelopment. And then subsequently, the borough began the process of a redevelopment plan. As you all know, that process has been ongoing since the spring of last year. There were 2 public workshops. The plan is in works. And so as part of that development of the redevelopment plan, it was found that there were 6 parcels that really should have been in the original designation study. They are all owned by New Jersey Transit. They are parcels that, as further review occurred and further work by the developer, they really were determined that they're needed to facilitate the development that has already been presented to the public in the workshop most recently in, I think that's November or December. So everything that the public has already seen is not changing. Adding these parcels, if this board makes that recommendation and the Borough Council accepts it, adding those to the existing designation would not at all change the scale of what's currently envisioned. It really would just allow that to happen. It's kind of a cleanup more than anything else. Would have been better to have caught them early on and have them in from the beginning, but it's better to have it now and look at these comprehensively as part of the overall redevelopment than do a redevelopment plan and have to add them back later. So it's a good catch. I'm glad that it happened now and we're looking at it. We are going through all of the requirements that were needed to do this redevelopment study, designation study. But it's really, as I said, more of a cleanup on something that should have probably happened earlier on. So I am going to go through that. The next slide, we looked at all the criteria that are required by the state in order to make a designation for redevelopment, the same requirements that we did about a year ago, but just for these specific 6 properties. So as a means of overview on this study area, it's about 13 acres of additional property that is being looked at. If you see on the map, everything in blue are the new parcels. Everything in red is what has already been designated. And as your attorney mentioned, that is not reopened. It's not subject to change. That designation exists. And the redevelopment plan is already underway for those red parcels. Blue parcels are 6 individual properties, again, all owned by New Jersey Transit. It's essentially the rail right of way, 3 different lots, but it's all the rail. And then the rail yard itself. So we kind of captured half the rail yard, but the property line kind of goes down the middle. So it's really the rest of the New Jersey Transit rail yard. There's actually 2 tiny triangular properties that are less than 1/10 of an acre that are within that. So that's what makes the 6. So the zoning, as with the overall area, it's a mix of your 2 business zones, your downtown zones, your heavier industrial zone, that's for the rail yard property. And then a portion of the study area is within that train station overlay district. So again, same zoning as the overall designation area. That really hasn't changed. Just a couple other quick maps on land use and the zoning. The land use is exclusively for these 6 properties, exclusively rail related. So it's the train station right away itself, the actual platform, again, the rail yard, a little bit of the commuter parking that wasn't previously captured, all again related to the railroad specifically. And then just in terms of what the conditions are like, you are supposed to look a lot, and we did. And they do vary by these 6 lots. I would say they're largely similar to the designation area that already exists. Unlike that designation area, there are no buildings, really. The train station building, the historic train station building, was previously captured in the existing designation. So these are infrastructure properties. The conditions for the use, for the railroad related use, the conditions are pretty good. They're not heavily deteriorated. They are serving that rail function. There are some issues with drainage that we are aware of. There's a lot of impervious coverage. It really does contribute to the overall impervious nature of this area. The heat island effect that we talked about before. There is very limited landscaping of green space on these properties. It's really 100% impervious. There's some maintenance needed, as there is really with any kind of infrastructure. Even on the platform itself, there's evidence of some rust. The rail yard property probably needs the most work. I know New Jersey Transit actually has some plans to upgrade the portions of that property that will remain as a rail yard. So there are some improvements there. That property is also characterized by this retention basin, which half of it is in designation areas that have already occurred. The other half is on one of these parcels. That doesn't seem to be serving any purpose, this retention basin. It's really an eyesore at this point. It's not doing anything in terms of drainage. It's a real impediment for any kind of future use of that property. So that's kind of a very quick overview.
I'm sorry, which one are you speaking of? The one closer to Chestnut, the retention basin?
It's the one, if you want to go back, Sean, to the study area now. So I know it's a little hard to see. It's kind of midway in that map, and you can see that the red line goes right down the middle of that retention basin. On the left-hand side, it's in a parcel that was already designated,
Right.
and then it's the right-hand side, the blue, that has not been designated. And the developer, as was shared at the public workshop, does intend to fill that basin and actually use a portion of that property for actual development.
Between Herbert and Leonard on.
Yeah, and there's two of them there.
Let's use your mics, okay?
No, there's two. There's two there. And one of them was always full. I don't know what happened to it. The one I'm referring to is as you go in to your left before you get to the first trailers there. I think it's split by the tracks, right?
Okay, there's a second one. This is all on the west side of the tracks.
Okay.
Just to also be
Yeah,
clear,
that's the big one, right, Susan?
it's the large one. Most clearly see on there. It's kind of right at the entrance for where there's the gate, the public
Yeah.
cannot enter. It's just beyond that gate. I also should have mentioned at the top of the presentation that New Jersey Transit has full support, giving their full support to this designation and the study of these additional 6 properties. They have issued correspondence to the borough that they have no issue with these properties being considered in a redevelopment plan, as long as they obviously have their rights to continue with the transit use, and that would be the case. Really, the developer's intent would be to, as part of a site plan application, which would occur after redevelopment plan approval, as part of that site plan, they would come in also with a subdivision. They would basically carve out the non-transit uses of those parcels to allow themselves to have the development potential. And I think it's really a lot of it, these 6 properties is really just to provide some flexibility and make sure that they're not encroaching on New Jersey Transit property. So it's again, tightening up the suspenders for that redevelopment. Any other questions about just the overall conditions, things that are happening on these properties? These are just a few pictures. I mean, obviously it's a railroad. It's going to continue to be a railroad. That is not going to change. And the same is the case for the rail yard itself. I know that was a question that came up in the first public workshop. There were some members of the public who were kind of excited by the prospect potentially of there not being a rail yard and what you could do there, but we made very clear from the beginning that this will continue to be a New Jersey Transit rail yard. It's important for their operations to the region as well. So really no change is projected or anticipated on any of the rail operations. And again, no change to the overall scope of this redevelopment project. So I know these are a lot of words that no one can see, but if you recall from the previous designation study, there are 8 criteria that the municipal land use law lays out when you are looking at redevelopment designation, and you need to meet, a good amount of these in order to make that case that these properties qualify. So the first one is that the buildings, it has buildings that are unsafe, substandard, dilapidated, obsolescent. The second one, criteria B is really about discontinuance or abandonment of uses or buildings, or that they have fallen into such disrepair that they're untenable. Criteria C is publicly owned land or otherwise improved land that's vacant for a period of time and is unlikely to redevelop on its own without use of the redevelopment tool. Criteria D is similar to A, but it's areas that contain buildings or improvements that are dilapidated, obsolete, overcrowded, or otherwise deleterious. It's less about the buildings themselves, more about the overall properties and sites. Criteria E is underutilized properties caused by condition of title, ownership, other conditions that really are causing them to like fallow. Criteria F is parcels greater than 5 acres that have improvements that have been destroyed by natural disaster or fire. That's obviously not the case here, or other casualty. Criteria G, properties in an urban enterprise zone designation, also not applicable here in Red Bank. And then lastly, criteria H, that the property is consistent with smart growth planning principles. So we did go through each of these 6 parcels. We tested them against these criteria, and there are other considerations too, though. On the next slide, there is this section 3 of the local redevelopment housing law that does have this stipulation that some properties may not need to meet all of those 8 criteria. They don't need to meet those statutory criteria if they can be shown to be really required for the overall redevelopment of a property. So there may be properties and sites that are kind of on the periphery that don't themselves meet these criteria, but really are necessary to be included as part of a holistic, comprehensive redevelopment. And then the last thing to note is that criterion H, which is the smart growth criteria, that is a newer addition to the LRHL, and best practices, you don't really want to hang your hat completely on that one. You want to make sure that you are meeting some other criteria as well. So these are things that are kept in mind when we looked at the criteria. So actually, you want to flip to the table, Sean? It's probably easier to see. So none of them meet the first criteria A, which is really dilapidated buildings, disrepair. There are not really any buildings on these properties. I think, as I said, they are serving their function as a transit use. The conditions are reasonably good for that use. B is the discontinuance or abandonment, not applicable here. These are all being used for transit. They will continue to be used. Now, criteria C, we believe all of the lots here meet that criteria. That, if you recall, is the publicly owned land that is not likely to be developed on its own without redevelopment as a school. Well, clearly these are New Jersey Transit owned properties. In the absence of any redevelopment, they would continue to be New Jersey Transit owned and operated. Nothing would likely be happening under traditional zoning because these are clearly transit properties. So that really does apply to all of the properties. And then there's as I mentioned before, there's 2 very, very small triangular properties. One is sort of on the rail yard side, and the other abuts an existing communal lot. You would never know from the conditions on the ground that those were separate lots. They're tiny, tiny triangular lots. They don't have access on their own. They would never develop on their own. They're not buildable, and they have no, again, road access. So those 2 properties, for those reasons, also meet the public land criteria C. D is obsolete, dilapidated buildings or sites. There are 3 parcels that we believe meet that. These are all kind of related to the rail yard. So there are 2 block 75, lots 104 and 172. These contain part of a communal lot. We established in the first designation study that these parking lots, and there's case law that supports this, parking lots of substantial impervious coverage that are just sort of acres of parking around a train station are an obsolete land use. They're not the best, highest and best use around a transit facility. So those 2 parcels that are those parking lots, for the same reasons that we established in the previous study, we believe they do meet that criterion D. And then there are 2 additional parcels, block 75, lots 104 and 104.01. These are some of the rail yard properties. And I think hopefully we established in this study as well as the previous one that the rail yard is an active use. It's going to continue to be an active use, but its arrangement is pretty faulty. It's inefficient. It takes up a huge amount of space. A lot of that is for parking, inefficient storage space. There's this retention pond that doesn't seem to be serving any kind of engineering function. So it is an obsolete arrangement of that site, even though the use is active and will continue to be active. I think that's a clear meeting of criterion D. Criterion E is underutilized or stagnant property that's not being used. That's not applicable here. This is all being used, as we noted. F and G, as I mentioned, are not applicable. F is natural disaster damage, and G is an urban enterprise zone. Red Bank is not an AUBZ, so those are not applicable. The only other of the 8 criteria that is met by most of the properties is that smart growth criterion. If you recall from the master plan, there was an area that was designated or shown as a transit-oriented development area. I remember it was in pink. That was the area that was really highlighted and recommended that this is where you should be working with New Jersey Transit. You should be working through the redevelopment process. It included almost all of the study area parcels. It just didn't include a couple of the rail yard properties, including the rail yard itself, the rail line. So we don't think you can as clearly make that case that it meets the smart growth criteria. Everything else was designated in the master plan in that transit oriented area. So as you see, you may not be able to see the X's. All of these properties have at least 2 of the 8 criteria, and then they all also do meet that section 3 criteria, which is the additional provision in local housing redevelopment law that provides for the ability to include properties that maybe don't meet that threshold themselves, but need to be brought into the overall redevelopment plan. So we think that it's very clear that there are multiple criteria that are met by each of these 6 parcels. So it's our recommendation that this board consider adding them or making a recommendation to Borough Council that they be added to the existing designation. Just a quick next steps, and then I'm happy to answer questions from the board or the public in terms of where we go from here. We have been actively working on the redevelopment plan. As Shauna knows, we've been coordinating with the developer since the public workshop in the late fall. So we are getting close to actually being finished with the redevelopment plan. But the next steps for this process itself would be you would make a recommendation if you agree to the Borough Council that they would designate these areas as meeting the criteria as being a redevelopment area. We would simply add these parcels to the work that's already being done in the redevelopment plan. And that plan, as I said, is pretty close to completion. We expect to be able to submit it to the borough pretty soon and anticipate working with Shauna that the public hearings of this body would be probably March, likely. And then if you are comfortable with the redevelopment plan after those public hearings, it would essentially go to the Borough Council for adoption as the governing body. That would complete the redevelopment process. Only then could the developer then come in to you with the site plan and subdivision application that would go through its own public process as well. So we're getting closer to the end of the redevelopment process. We are not at the end of this development process with this developer. So it's sort of the middle of the process, and certainly much more opportunity for public comment review and including review by this board.
Anyone from the board have any questions for Susan?
Yeah, Susan, could you just restate that timeline again, please, and the elements of that?
So if you agree with this designation study tonight, you would make a recommendation to the Borough Council that they add these 6 parcels to the existing redevelopment area. Then we would proceed with the completing redevelopment plan for both the previous designation and these 6 parcels, the entire area. That plan will be submitted to you and likely have public hearings on it in March, these 2. And then if you're satisfied with the redevelopment plan with public comment as well, you would basically send that to Borough Council. They would then consider it. There's a public hearing for them as well. So they would then be the ones to adopt the redevelopment plan. After the redevelopment plan is in place, it's really the timeline is on the developer at that point. But when they're ready, they would come to you. They would submit a site plan and subdivision application, and then go through that usual process that you would typically see for site plan application with the planning board. Again, public comments on that as well, public hearing on that site plan and subdivision.
Got a follow?
Yeah.
When we send our redevelopment plan to the council for ratification approval, what are the primary elements of that plan? Is it density, that sort of thing?
So one of the benefits of redevelopment plan as opposed to regular zoning is it does get at all of your usual area bulk provisions, density, setbacks, coverage, height, those basic parameters, but it also gets into design. And it can get fairly specific, and that's really why we had the public workshops and why we brought on an architecture firm to help us with the overall massing, design, even just consideration of the public space as well. There's a lot of public amenities proposed as part of this process. there's a shared street, there's renovation of the train station building, there's a whole public plaza. Those kind of things you really can't get at with regular zoning. So a redevelopment plan is gonna be able to look at the holistic, make requirements, make guidelines for things like how much public space there is, how that public space is treated and how accessible it is to the public truly. All of those things is part of that redevelopment plan. So it gets into a lot more specifics than the normal zoning would, even though it also does this basic.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the board? Anyone from the public have a question for Susan regarding her presentation? You're welcome to come up.
Susan, you may have to share your mic though, just because we have one mic right now.
Nobody? Okay, does anyone from the board have any,
But there is somebody, yeah.
Somebody.
just you can grab that if you want it.
So funny to talk to her, but I have a microphone and I'm standing right next to her, so. Anthony Sotaro, 135-137 Oakland Street. Also on Historic Preservation Commission, this is not coming from the commission, this is just my questions. I guess one of the questions now, we're adding properties that are the actual platforms, the crossings, all that stuff is now included. And you mentioned some things about, I guess, fixing rust and different, things on the platforms. This is really, it's a once in 130-year opportunity to make sure that the crossings, the train bridge, things that you never get an opportunity to fix. If you're now including them in a redevelopment study, I know it's crazy talk and could delay a project or, cost a lot of money, but I was curious if you had been in communication with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority about any of these plans.
Anthony, do you mean the bridge on the trestle at West Front Street? New Jersey Transit has made it very clear, they want absolutely nothing to do with touching that. As much as we like it, so that people, yeah, like the governor. Yeah.
The North Jersey Transportation Planning.
I'm familiar with NJTA. We haven't talked with them as part of this study because they don't really have jurisdiction over this property. It's New Jersey Transit. So we could certainly include in the redevelopment plan that there's a recommendation that New Jersey Transit itself actually do some upgrades on the platform within this area. We can't really dictate what they do elsewhere on their properties, elsewhere in Beverly, for example. The bridges or other rights of way. But we could certainly include that in the redevelopment plan. It's kind of gonna be on them and not, or maybe they'll get the developer to pay for it. That's kind of between New Jersey Transit and the developer. But it is an opportunity, as you said, to improve this infrastructure. I don't think, and we haven't seen the final setbacks, but the proposal by the developer really should not affect the actual platforms at all. It's really just, as I understand, their shared street that they had shown previously at the public workshop. That encroached just a little bit as you get closer to the platforms, but not the platforms itself. So they really just wanted to make sure that they had the room that they needed to get the access and the public improvements within the platforms themselves, the developers will be and certainly the tracks themselves. But yeah, we can add recommendation that guidance that New Jersey Transit should upgrade as needed. That could certainly be part of this study area.
I was on the Zoom call a couple of weeks ago with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. They had a Zoom call about this. I was on it and we did breakout sessions with the directors of it. This is absolutely something they would get involved in. I talked in depth about it. They said it's bigger than a Red Bank project, of course. They would have to get the county involved, but this is exactly who you talk to. This is exactly who can help move the needle and force people that normally say no. Because they fund these, they have $3 billion annually that they give out. That's it. That's my piece.
Thank you. We'll be sure to send it to them.
And New Jersey Transit is here to hear this too. They're in the back.
Sure.
really want to kneel.
Then pick it up, Mary Ellen. You can pick it up or you can sit down.
Mary Ellen Best, 95 Hudson Avenue. I'm not quite sure why this designation is necessary for the New Jersey Transit property, because they've already picked their developer, who's already presented his plan. And also a good part of this property lies within the train overlay zone, which already has increased density.
So let me just, let me chime in. So this board does not have jurisdiction to question the wisdom of whether these properties make sense to be designated. That's not the role of this board. But that's what you're saying. All right, you can add, what is your question?
It's just, what benefit is this designation?
Okay, and again, so you are asking, what is the benefit, what is the wisdom, and this board does not do that. We have no control over that. The council has asked this board to find out whether these properties meet the criteria. That's not a question of a positive criteria, like this is the greatest thing ever. That's not the role. The only thing we do is exactly what Susan just went through, is whether these properties meet the criteria that she went over. And this board has to make a decision whether they do or they don't. The board could say, we think this is the dumbest idea. I'm not saying they're saying that, because they're probably not. But the board could say this is the dumbest idea. We're completely against this redevelopment. That's not their role. Their role is purely to act as a judge to determine whether or not it meets the criteria. And that's it, nothing else.
All right, so I'm just trying to clarify in my mind this process, because it's a long process and it's quite complicated. And when I listened to Susan speaking about, because I'm very much looking forward to seeing what, is it BFJ? I keep getting the letters mixed up. Is gonna come up with, but when I'm listening to you speak, I mean, is your role just to basically rubber stamp what's already been presented by the developer?
No,
Or
so
are we, or is there the potential that we're gonna see something that's substantially different?
so that's not even before the board tonight. Her only role here tonight is to evaluate these properties, which the council asked the planning board to do, and the planning board has asked her to prepare this report. That's the only thing we're here for tonight. So whatever's going on with the redeveloper is not before the board. The board has no idea what's going on with the redeveloper. It's irrelevant to tonight's conversation.
Well, Mr. Beebe asked a question about the process, so I'm just asking a
Yes.
question about the process. And I feel like the information that's being presented to the public is quite confusing for a lot of people. And I would really like everyone to be well informed as we move forward.
So I think the only question about the process was what happens next. So I think as Susan said, the next step is if the board decides that these properties do meet the criteria, they're gonna adopt the report. They don't have a choice unless they find that it doesn't meet the criteria, and then they can say no. Assuming they say yes, it's gonna go to council. Council is then going to make the final determination as to whether to designate these properties as areas in need of redevelopment. They don't have to. The board could say it meets the criteria, and the council could still say no. So it's up to the council at that point. At that point, assuming that everything has been put together and that everything is considered areas in need of redevelopment, and we already know the vast majority of these properties have been, these are just add-ons. At some point, there's going to be a redevelopment plan presented.
Yes, and I'm looking forward.
And that's when you're gonna get everything you were talking about. That is gonna come before this board, and the board's gonna have public hearings on the redevelopment plan itself. And Susan said the probability is that that's going to be in March. I don't know if it is or isn't, but if it is, that will be an open meeting, public can come in, and that's when you're gonna see everything. The board tonight, the board has not seen anything, which I think is what prompts Mr. Beebe's question. Because I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I'm assuming that's why you're asking, because the board hasn't seen anything. And that's when you're gonna see it, board's gonna see it, all in public hearing for the first time, that's when it's gonna be presented. And that's
That's not even what's gonna be built. That's just a redevelopment plan.
correct,
Then the developer
right?
makes an application, does a site plan, comes in and does a normal application like someone wants to build a building. We don't know when that's gonna be because it's on their time.
But it's my understanding, and I know you want to just move it on to this criteria, but it's my understanding that what will come from the plan is actually the zoning ordinances that are gonna set the limits for density, for height.
Your understanding is correct.
That's correct.
It's a little bit, so once you approve the plan, as long as the developer meets the criteria set in the plan, then it's going to be approved. So then the question is, the plan.
It's not, that's not entirely true. So I've done this for a long time. I've seen these go through. You are correct that it's set that when the plan's adopted, which is not before the board tonight. So we're jumping ahead.
I want to
It's fine.
understand
So
really where the public can really be heard in this.
the public
process.
gets heard when the plan comes before the board, you're gonna have an opportunity to be heard. All right, and you're right. If the plan is approved exactly as it comes before the board, or whatever goes before the board, it's eventually gonna go back to the council, and assuming the council adopts it,
You mean the redevelopment.
the redevelopment plan.
Not the plan for development, not the
Correct,
buildings.
correct. No.
Totally separate things.
But Dan,
Yes, I get it. I get
but
it.
Dan, what she's saying is she's not completely off base. So what would then be adopted by council would set the zoning. Okay, that would be the plan that is adopted. So then what the whole idea is typically is the applicant will come in and design a project that's going to meet the parameters within the plan so that it's variance free,
Which would be nice.
which would be nice. It almost never happens. All right, invariably, the applicants usually come in and they have some, even though they were involved presumably in the creation of the plan, which Susan has said, invariably, once the plan is adopted, they still come in and they still ask for changes. And just because you meet all the ordinance criteria has nothing to do with the site plan. So I have seen it on many, many occasions where the applicant will come in, they have basically a 90% variance-free application. And the board still says, well, the site plan doesn't work the way it is going, the way you've designed it. So you're gonna have to change something. And again, those hearings, the site plan application hearings, again, a second bite at the apple for the public to come in and comment on it. So the public's very involved in all those aspects. Everything's open to the public, everything is transparent. It's just tonight, none of that is before the board tonight, and I just don't want to confuse anyone and think that we're talking about those type of things.
I think there is a lot of confusion, and I would hope that there would be more clarification coming through, because there have been things that have been appearing that have called this the plan. And, you know, I know it's not the plan.
Right.
I know it's the designation for this area in need of redevelopment. But that designation.
And this is not the designation of the area need real. This is finding that that these properties meet the criteria. There will be a public hearing before the council, because when they open this, whether to designate it or not, that the council will have a meeting and they'll decide. And the public will have an opportunity to stand up at that meeting and say, hey, I don't think you should do this despite the fact it meets the criteria, if that's how you feel. Or they'll get up and be able to say, this is a great idea, you should approve it.
And we're only here because there were some properties missed
Right.
when this was all initially put together. And if you look at the blue properties on the TV screen, they obviously should have been included originally. They're a chunk, they're another, it's the actual train tracks all the way on the left, not the freight line, the passenger train that comes to Maple and Broad, and then the whole center section. Not that I think there's gonna be any buildings built right there, but they should all be included so that we can look at the whole site.
Never say never, so you never know.
I've been surprised before.
But thank you for your time, yes.
Thank you.
Dan, I have
To
a question for
follow
Mark.
Mr. Blankstein's point, I've even seen 100% variance free applications get nudged by boards and the public to make changes. So
Yeah.
just like any site plan application, there will be opportunities for this board and the public to have further input.
Tommy?
So the transit is saying regarding the one retention pond, which it's mostly dry all the time. So this board is not, because they're saying that. Anything this board does tonight doesn't mean that can't be revisited if it needed to be, depending on what they're gonna put there. As a right of way for the lateral for the waste. from Bodman, because that runs through there.
Right, we don't own the property.
We don't own the property, but as far.
That would all be on a site plan.
Okay, so that's what I'm asking. So just because we're saying that now,
Yes.
the engineers and the professionals will have that. So we're not talking about 5 years from now, having more water on Herbert Street or behind the Borough Garage and
No.
putting holes through the laterals.
You're 100% right, and as Dan just said, it's all gonna come back here for a the same site plan you see on every other application is gonna have to come here.
Their engineers got to work on it, then our engineers got to review it, and we can take all of those things you just mentioned into account when that's happening. That's the time where we want to make sure there won't be flooding on neighboring properties.
100%.
In the study or even the redevelopment plan is gonna bind you and the borough to accepting an application that doesn't work from an engineering perspective. So all of those things will be fully reviewed during site plan and
You're always gonna have a normal site plan hearing with notice to the public is the same way you do any other application that's ever come before the board.
I was only asking because of the fact that that retention pond might not be in their plan to the public's listening to that, like I am.
Right.
That's all.
Understood.
The question. It's a normal thing, but normally it only comes before us if if it requires a waiver or something, right?
A site plan? No, site plans come even when there's no variances whatsoever, no waivers whatsoever. You always see site plan applications.
Nothing this big could get done without coming to a planning board.
I mean, if someone has a plan and it satisfies all criteria,
It still comes before this board for site plan review.
seeing anyone.
It's used,
For single family.
except for single family homes, right? Obviously, that would not come here, but any commercial application, I think what you probably have seen is that 9 out of 10 applications have some sort of variance. So you just assume that, but a completely variance-free application still has to come here for site plan approval.
Anyone else from the public have any comments or questions? Sir? Dan, we got you out of the house. I'm incredibly impressed. Thank you for coming. I do love it when people come. You can sit over there and talk into the mic, please.
I'm a bit of a broken record,
But name and address first, even though we know who you are.
1 Irving Place. But anytime you try to designate a redevelopment area, I'm gonna come and say you should. So, I just wanna look at the criteria.
Keep in mind, we're not doing that tonight. All we're doing is adding these properties. We are not designating,
You're adding, okay.
we're adding properties to this plan.
And to correct that, Mr. Chairman, you are not adding properties to the plan. All you are doing tonight is finding that these specific properties meet the criteria to be added to the plan. The council will be the ones to determine whether to add it to the plan. The planning board has no authority to say, and I think we went through this the last time, this board has no authority to say, we don't like the plan, so we're going to vote no. They don't have that authority, and that's what you're gonna ask them to do. They can't listen to, they don't have that power.
I'm gonna go through the criteria.
And you're gonna say they don't meet the criteria. Okay, that's fair. Go ahead.
So, criteria C, which all of them meet, does not apply to publicly owned properties. It applies to properties that are owned by the municipality, the county, a local housing authority, redevelopment agency, or redevelopment entity. Not to any state entities, not to New Jersey Transit. Criteria C does not apply to New Jersey Transit's property. It's not owned by one of the local or county public entities that are in the statute. So criteria C doesn't apply. Criteria D, I'll accept that, in fact, the courts have found that parking lots are obsolete. But criteria D does not say that something is eligible because it's obsolete. It's eligible if its obsolescence creates it makes it detrimental to the safety, health, morals, or welfare of the community. I don't see how the parking lots at the train station are detrimental to safety, health, morals, or welfare of this community. They are obsolete, but that obsolescence does not make them detrimental to those things. So it doesn't meet criteria D. Criterion H, I think it's really well laid out in the report that you can't say it meets criteria H because no one's ever said what the smart growth planning principles are. So it can't apply to them. Section 3, interestingly, Section 3 says they're not detrimental to public health. So in this report, you have 3 properties that are detrimental to safety, health, well, morals, whatever. And at the same time, because they qualify for criteria D, at the same time qualify for Section 3, which says they are not. So I think at the very least, got to correct the report so that it doesn't contradict itself. As far as having to include all of these properties, some of the properties need to be included, but to me, they're only fit to be included if you accept that some of them are, that other properties are, that there needs to be the other properties need to be on there. So they sort of hang together. Well, if most of them don't meet the criteria, then they don't hang together. There's no need to build them. So in any case, Section 3, maybe, but Section H is ridiculously weak. D doesn't apply to any of them because they are not owned by a municipality or county public entity. And Section D doesn't apply because they're not detrimental to the safety, health, morals, or welfare of the community. So, thank you.
Susan, can you address Mr. Reardon's comments, please?
Yes, so the way that we read the local redevelopment housing law is that criteria C applies to publicly owned land. It may be a legal question as to whether it's municipally or New Jersey Transit owned. There were a couple of properties that, in addition to being publicly owned, we feel meet that criteria because they are not able to ever be developed on their own due to their size, their lack of access, the configuration of those properties. So I guess it's maybe a question for Mr. Lexstein on the read of criteria C. Our read is that it applies to publicly owned property, public entity owned properties that would include New Jersey Transit. Set aside that for now, I think criteria D clearly applies to the 3 parcels that we have identified that have to do with parking. That was already established in the previous designation study, that there are deleterious impacts to having these vast parking areas, that they do create negative impacts, including the heat island impact, including stormwater issues and drainage issues that we know are established in this area. So that is part of the deleterious impact criteria D. I mean, if you can't say that this meets smart growth criteria literally at the train station itself, then there is nothing that would ever meet smart growth criteria. So I think it's very clear that all of these properties, I mean, I would argue all of them could easily meet it, but we are being conservative and only calling out the properties that were previously identified in the master plan within the TOD area. So that's a conservative read, but they clearly do meet that smart growth criteria. And then Section 3 doesn't say that there's no other criteria that are met, and then therefore you throw them in that Section 3. It's that these are properties that need to be included because of the holistic redevelopment possibility and the need to include these properties to effectuate desired redevelopment. So we think that whether a criterion is met by an individual property or not, all of the properties do fall into that Section 3 category. They are necessary to include as part of this overall redevelopment and holistic redevelopment. So Mr. Lexstein, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Mr. Reardon, right? Yeah, I mean, you're correctly quoting the statute as far as C is concerned. The word state doesn't appear in there, but it's always been my understanding that it does apply, as Susan's saying, to publicly owned land. And obviously with New Jersey Transit is in support of this. So obviously New Jersey Transit understands it to be, and their attorneys understand it to read that way also. Otherwise, New Jersey Transit would be here saying, well, you can't redevelop our land. And I think maybe the reason the statute reads the way it does is because when the state legislature put it, and I'm guessing, when the state legislature put it together, I don't think they ever conceived of the idea that you'd want to redevelop state-owned property, because the municipality, how would they do that? You know, because the state is, the state obviously is a superior entity. But it's always been my understanding that it covers all of public lands. New Jersey Transit obviously has the same understanding, otherwise they would not be here in support. And I think, Susan, what you've done is fine.
I've been involved in previous redevelopment designations studies that included DOT owned land, New Jersey Transit owned land. It's always been my understanding as well.
Right. And in those cases, DOT didn't step in and say, hey, you can't do this either. So I think it's the universally accepted definition.
And this is an opportunity really to affect some change in the donut hole of our town. It's a huge piece of property.
That's not what we're deciding.
No, it's not, but adding these properties, I think, furthers that goal. That is my non-legal.
That's his non-legal opinion, but again, that is not what the board is tasked to do this evening. I'm gonna say that 10 million times, because what that does, it furthers the belief that the board has some control over it, and the board doesn't. It's not our role.
Sure, we're not doing anything here. Chris?
Thing. And so in support of that, I urge this board to make any.
Chris, give us your name and address, please.
Sorry, Chris Havens, 111 River Street. And I urge the board to advise the council that these parking lots, because they're impermeable surfaces, which people don't like anymore, and a lot of people I know want impermeable to go away, so they are detrimental. And also, it's got to be, I don't really feel it's that unsafe, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, this is the least safe feeling place in the borough of Red Bank. 100%. And then the most unconscionable thing for all us taxpayers is they provide zero revenue. So there's so many reasons in and out of that report for this to be done. I urge that many people here support including those properties, because those properties are terrible, terrible use of land. It's like Red Bank, New Jersey.
Thank you. Anyone else? I love it when the public comes. I'll stay all night for you.
By yourself.
Based on Shauna when I said that. Nothing else from the board or the public? Sir, come on up. Name and address, please.
Hello, Drew Logan, 26 Allen Place. It seems like me, now I'm not a lawyer, seems like me it meets the criteria, and I hope it ends up with as many apartments as humanly possible being built on this land. Thanks.
Allow me to say that as many as possible is not gonna happen. A reasonable number is gonna happen. As many as possible affordable units, I agree with. Anyone else? Does anyone from the board have any interest in making a motion either way about whether or not we should affirm these properties meet the criteria to be included?
I would make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Sorry, who first it?
Wilson.
Wilson and second by Barbara. That's all I can say. Second.
Mayor Portman,
Yes, sorry, yes.
Thomas Welsh,
Yes.
Tina Bonatakis,
Hang on a second.
Yes.
Just real quick, I just got a text from a resident that his hand is up. He's on the Zoom call.
Oh, we don't.
We don't do that. No, we can't.
Okay, just making sure.
Dan Mancuso,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
Yes.
Barbara Boas.
Yes. Wilson Bibi,
Yes.
And Fred Stone.
Yes.
To the person with their hand up on the Zoom call, thank you for attempting to participate, but we do not take questions and comments from Zoom because it's very difficult to swear people in and have them raise their right hand as necessary to speak in a meeting. So I would encourage you. I'll give anyone a ride to a planning board meeting that needs one. And I'll give you a ride home too, if you can. But thank you for participating. We appreciate you being here. And we have, what is it?
It's a resolution to.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, anticipation, if the board was going to recommend the adoption of the study tonight and send it to council, I did prepare a resolution which the board should have in the records. So that's available to be adopted tonight.
I'll make the motion to approve the resolution to affirm these properties meet the criteria and send it to the mayor and council for their consideration. We have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Mayor Portman,
Yes.
Thomas Welch,
Yes.
Christina Bonatakis. Yes. Ken Mancuso,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
Yes.
Papa Boas.
Yes. Wilson Bibi,
Yes.
and Fred Stone.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I mean it when I say it, every time I say it. Thank you so much for coming out. It makes a big difference in our town. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Susan.